Are you good enough? Today's guest, Simone Sloan, has some great advice on how to see your own value and defeat that self-doubt. What happens when you try to systemize something that inherently requires a human touch? How can we reframe change so that we aren't as resistant to it? And how do you know if you're cut out to be a leader? Simone, Otis, and I answer all these questions and much more in this jam-packed episode. Quick reminder, rate, review, and subscribe to the show wherever you're listening. You can also find the full videos of the show on our YouTube page. And if you learned something from Simone, Otis, or me in our conversation, make sure to share the episode with someone else so they can learn it too. The best way to support our show is to share your favorite episodes with the rest of your tribe. This episode is brought to you by Tribe and Purpose. That transition from college to that first career is a difficult one, and it's even harder when you lose your sense of identity. If you're an athlete who just hung up the cleats, it's hard to go from being a rugby player to being Joe in accounting. We created Next is Best to help retired college athletes use their skills to create an impact through entrepreneurship. Next is Best by Know Your Tribe will help to smoothen that rough transition by helping you establish a clear sense of purpose, an actionable path to success, and the tools you need to manage your life. Your 20s are a confusing and chaotic time. Next is Best gives you the tools you need to make sense of the chaos and make this next chapter of your life the best one yet. You can learn more about Next is Best by Know Your Tribe at findyourpurpose.coach. Now here's Cam Otis with the show.
Welcome to the Cam Otis Show. We're a father-son business podcast where we talk with other lifelong learners about making an impact and solving big problems. In this episode, Simone Sloan, I almost did it, man. Golly, I've been thinking about it all morning. Simone Sloan, everybody knows what I was going to say. She's just a famous gymnast, almost as famous as our guest, Simone Sloan. Simone, it is so good to see you.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm excited to get into it because I find your philosophy and the way you run your business and what you focus on extremely interesting. And I want to jump in. One of the things that jumps out at me, because I played around with it a little bit myself, was emotional intelligence. And I want Simone's definition of what boy. I am flubbing. I need to get some more coffee and lubricate my tongue. Yeah, I'm just going to let you start talking. Tell us about emotional intelligence, and I'm shutting up.
Absolutely. And, with my company, Your Choice Coach, we do a lot of it around emotional intelligence, and we've seen a heightened need for that during this time in COVID. So what is it? It's really around how do we see ourselves and our perceptions right around that. In addition to how do we bring people in and connect with others and our own self-awareness, but being also aware of others' emotions when you're interacting with them. How does that play in our decision-making? It impacts how we handle stress, everything that comes down to it. But most importantly, it's around how do we move from that toxic behavior into one that's more collaborative with trust and more open connections.
I love it. And you said something I always, my smirking, those of you who are listening to us on podcast world, I'm smirking pretty big because I always get this way when people talk about stress, because it is all self-induced. So how does having a better understanding of our emotions and truthfully others' emotions help us deal with stress?
Absolutely. Well, we know that the outside, right? There are a couple of ways of perceived stress that we induce in ourselves, and then also things that we can't really control that triggers us. And so what it really looks at too is our tolerance to that and how we express ourselves when we experience a stressor. But first, you have to be aware of this. What is causing this? Why am I acting this way? And if we are not aware of it, we're just lashing out onto people in a different way, and they're not having the best experience with us. So it really comes down to understanding and getting curious with ourselves around what's causing this. What body sensations am I having? It sounds strange to say that, but seriously, and really understanding why. Because now we can then articulate, this is what you did, or this is what happened that's causing me to do this. And I sometimes say to others, I say, listen, this is not you. I just know this right now is stressing me out. I just have to get this off my chest. Don't take it personally. And it allows that space for people to listen to me.
That's like the prelude of, can I ask you a personal question? It's like, oh no.
I think the interesting thing there, talking about the emotional intelligence aspect, is the learning through others and seeing that process. Because sometimes the internal reflection is the hardest part. Understanding how you're going through it is really difficult, but you can see it in someone else, where it's a little bit easier to pick apart someone else's actions and those type of things, and then you can use that as a launching point. And I think that's the important piece there. Is you can observe these things, but then you have to turn that internally, because otherwise,
Absolutely.
and I'm sure there's a fancy psychology word for this, but otherwise you're just seeing everyone else do it poorly and going, gosh, they're bad at that, shaking your finger type of thing, rather than ever turning that back into yourself.
Absolutely, and I always say you have to take the mirror, put that mirror up, and really look at that. And you said a really interesting thing too, Camden, because that's how leadership gets passed on. My leader did this, my manager did this, and so internalizing this, these are the things I have to do also to get ahead, and that's how it self-perpetuates itself in the marketplace and in the workplace, and it's not really good at times.
That's a great lead-in, because I love asking this question. When you think back to who do you model your leadership style after?
Yeah, starting out, I'll tell you who I don't, because starting out in my career,
That's also very important.
you get to see what works for you and what doesn't, who are really good at X, Y's, and Z's, either communication skills, bringing people together, strategy. And those are the qualities I would look for in terms of people to emulate or even to ask to be mentors, right? I've had very toxic, where they didn't want to bring people together. They were always about naming, shaming, blaming, hogging ideas, hogging decisions. And it wasn't a very conducive place to learn or work. And it was very stressful, right? So that's one thing I realized early on. I said, I don't want to be like that.
Well, you had to learn the right thing from somebody. So where did that come from? Does it go back to mom and dad? What?
Combination of folks in my life, and you mentioned your parents, obviously, you're right from that perspective. I also say my aunt, who was a great businesswoman, still is, talked about bringing people together, talk about evolving yourself and being relevant in the marketplace, being willing to take risks. Those were things also that I've taken. I think, and also I had some other great leaders that I worked with in corporate, because I'm back in pharma days, and who used to mentor me, who were like 3 seniors above me, and I'd come into the office and I go, I want to learn from you. And they were very willing to do that. And so those were some examples from that perspective to support my growth and development. And trial and error, right? Trial and error.
And, in the same vein as the trial and error, learning from those mistakes, what I'm curious about, Simone, is, and the easy answer is it's both, obviously, but you can't say both on this, of which one do you think has a better effect on leadership? Is it the negative examples of don't do this, or the positive examples of act like this? If you had to kind of pick one camp, which one would you put yourself in?
I want the positive. I want positive. People are, you get more bees with honey than you do with vinegar. So I want honey. And I say that because when you are in an experience where you have people who will want you to learn, give you the resources and tools to thrive, that is a very great opportunity for the learner and also for the manager to build and foster that trust. People don't leave organizations, they leave people, right? And so if you are able to earn that trust, that connection, collaboration, and when they are thriving and growing, that means you are also growing and thriving. So I take the positive.
That's you brought up something that's really I guess important, or I should say more prevalent in the business news nowadays in the last probably 6-7 months. This quiet quitting, the great resignation was the catchphrase before that. I had a client that I just wrapped up with a couple of weeks ago who talked about quiet hiring. So there's all these sort of things. How do you help the individual? I want to speak to the individual before we talk corporate leadership in that sense. But how do you help the individual find that path so that they do feel like they're recognized, fit in, and those sort of things in their life?
Absolutely. Well, one of the things that I noticed also is that they're always looking for permission from others, meaning, am I good enough? Am I doing the right thing? And so the first thing I do is really have people think about what's their vision and what they're really trying to create for themselves, so they start owning their worth and their value and not waiting for someone to tell them or share with them what it should be. From that, I have them think about, well, you have a vision. What is your value proposition? What is it that you bring to the table? Why are you unique? And what are the benefits of people working with you? Personally, professionally, right? Again, the self-reflection piece to really understand and own that value. From that, then, going to go into what are some objectives that you want to create for yourselves, right? Long-term, short-term. And it also helps to get you focused now on activities that are going to drive those objectives. So that way, everyone loves shiny things, and I get it. But when the shiny thing comes around, you're asking yourself, how does that align back to my objective, and how is it going to make me reach my vision?
All right. Did you read my book or something? I'll tell you what, within like 3 words, those were like the same thing, the way I always put it too. So that's pretty cool that we are spot on. At least 2 of us believe this.
Awesome. But you know, right? Just in terms of your experiences, if you don't get focused in terms of what you're doing, you're all over the place, and your life becomes like this whack-a-mole, and you're just doing things very reactively as opposed to being intentional.
You know, I think one big piece of that, talking about like being able to see your own value and, your purpose, whatever you're contributing to it, the things your value proposition, as you put it, I think is a really important thing. But from a coaching perspective, when somebody's stuck to where they don't see their value, they haven't had the outcomes that they're trying to measure themselves against, how do you get them out of that so they can see the value that they do have, even if they haven't, checked all those boxes or that type of thing?
Sure. And this is where I do some work with them to have them ask people about what they bring to the table and how people actually see themselves. And it's a scary thing, right? Because you're now going up, but I say, blame it on me, tell them that you're working with a coach, and this is why you're doing it. But it helps them too by hearing these words that people are saying, because we all have this narrative about what we think and who we are, but then to actually hear that being reflected back is powerful. And I think that's one of the ways through which to really get them with some data.
So I love that, but there's one interesting thing here, and this is something, Dan, you and I have talked about this in our calls with Tribe and Purpose. I think there's a really interesting kind of dilemma there, which is, in order to get that momentum going of being able to see your value, you need to talk with folks to show your value. But then when we talk about building up your value and motivation on those things, you don't want the extrinsic, you want the intrinsic. And I think there's this just like a little bit ironic thing of looking for the positive extrinsic to build up the intrinsic so that you can keep carrying forward. But you see what I mean? It's almost like that irony of like, I'm a coach telling you that you want intrinsic motivation, but then it's like, you're like not motivated. I'm like, well, call your mom and, see what she loves about you. It's like,
I say no parents. I say no parents and no religious spiritual persons in your life, right? Because what you want to do too is really what I'm asking them to do is, what is the experience people are having with you? And how is that being translated? And I think that is powerful when you're looking at it from that perspective, right? Because I'm not saying go ask them what's the experience you have with me, but in a way, that's really what the feedback comes back into. And so if you have this fixed narrative about yourself in terms of either, oh, I'm a rock star, or oh, I'm not good enough, they're telling you, hey, this is what I'm seeing right now.
Like, maybe you ought to put down that guitar and pick up a pen, right? Or at least step away from the microphone, please.
As my daughter says, she says, leave it to the professionals, Mom.
Yes. There's a reason we outsource, believe me. I want to jump into something I thought was interesting when I was reading your bio, and doing a little digging on you. That always makes people sweat. It was like, digging on me. What? No, but you went in college. You started in biology and then pharmaceuticals. What pulled you? What was interesting enough to leave biology? Which, okay. Camden's brother is a microbiologist, and we all always scratch our heads with that one. Believe me. And you even mentioned pharmaceuticals, big pharma, working in big pharma, and having some mentors there. And I think there's some areas there I'd even love to jump into. So I'll shut up and let you tell me about what was it about pharmacy that pulled you that direction.
Sure. Life sciences as one of my passions, and being biology, a med student from that realm. And my mom called me up one day and said, are you happy? I said, yeah, I'm living your dream. And she said, you know what? Talk to your aunt. My aunt was a pharmacist at the time. And so after speaking with her and realizing the similarities, I then went back and did my own research around the industry in terms of the marketability, being a female in the industry, what opportunities were there. And I said, in a flip minute, switched my major and then had to cram all these courses in order to make the fall semester as a pharmacy student. So talk about physics, talk about your organic chemistry, everything that had to come to play. And people were just like, how are you doing this? I don't even know how I did it, but I did it. And so just in terms of science, I'm always good at sciences and math, and that was something I always wanted to leverage, but I also didn't want to be pigeonholed in terms of roles. So when I got to pharmacy, I tried everything I could. I went into the marketing aspects of things from as an intern, worked at the hospital, did retail pieces, and realized, this wasn't necessarily for me, but how can I leverage this? And I'm glad I had the marketing element of it, because I love business. And I said, okay, this is what I'm going to do, get my MBA, and then go into the pharmaceutical world. So that was like my vision.
You mentioned that passion for the life sciences and then that attraction to business and marketing as well. How do you square those? What are like kind of the core components there that connect those different aspects for you?
For me, I would say that it's one, human connection, understanding behavior, and then also in terms of in terms of human dynamics, right? In terms of how people respond. But at the end of the day, I'm serving and I'm helping others, either through when I was in healthcare, right? In terms of helping people become better. When it's in marketing, it's also around awareness and how do we make sure people are better in terms of what the communications and understanding of that. But then also there's a consumer dynamics too, in terms of people's behaviors and what drives them. And I think that even plays into the work that I do here from a diversity, equity, inclusion perspective, as well as the emotional intelligence work that we do, because it's all around human behaviors and understanding.
How did you make the leap? Because once you're in the corporate dynamic, was there a catalyst that you were just like, ain't no more, sort of, I'm running away from this? Or was it like, I think I might dip my toes in this pond over here?
Yeah, it was a hard decision because I really enjoyed what I was doing, but I was also traveling a lot. And so it came down to, is this something that's sustainable? Or is it something what's going to really serve me in my long-term capacity? And so I found mentors and did a lot of the assessments and really tried to figure out what that transition was going to look like and what that next act would be. And so after doing my soul searching and all that good stuff, that's how I found, I would say coaching really found me. And I do a lot of the ontological, which is a study of being, right, in terms of who we are, a work that was really missing in the corporate world. And I said, you know what, this is something that I really need to do and spend time with. So that was how that kind of transition came in. And of course, I'm like, then again, you're like, Word, are people going to pay me for this? But at the time, it was more of serving myself so that way I can figure out what my next path would be. And this is where I am today.
We talk a bunch, with different guests about the gap between, the science and the reality in a lot of ways when it comes to like human behavior. And the most interesting piece there is like, one, it's fun to, pontificate back and forth of those different behaviors and measuring things and all that kind of stuff. But then the application is where it gets really interesting. Of you can have these, these aspects of human behavior that you can measure and you can say this is really happening, but you might not be able to fully put it together about why or how it's happening and these different things. And then putting that application into the real world is like the whole other level there. So what has your experience been like pushing that kind of application in the business world to where the science might not have fully caught up to the reality, to the observations?
Sure. I go back to the pharmaceutical industry when I was working within the marketing space, because that was all about consumer attitudes and their behaviors. And so when we were ever launching anything that we were doing, product services, we always went back to our customer base and asked them, what do you think about this? What would drive you to do X, Y's, and Z's? And really hearing it from their voices, right? Launching. Then when you're launching something, you still need feedback. People are either going to buy it or not, or it goes a whole different way that we didn't expect. And so you still need to have the data behind it to support what directions are going, in addition to monitoring the things you can't control, your competitors' responses, as well as the otherwise market dynamics that take place. So that has always been in terms of testing, understanding those movements. Take it in terms of the world, right? In terms of behavior, where it gets more fuzzy, right? And you don't have all the fine point data. Change is so emotionally driven, right? Because people hear change like, resistance comes to mind, right? The first thing that happens. And so it's not about trying to inject them and say, here, do it now. But you also have to understand those patterns. And just by observing and understanding and diving deeper into that, you get a baseline of how they function, what is their comfort areas, to allow us to then say, okay, how are we going to move the needle in this? And I'm not saying some huge leaps, but to them, it could be this big in terms of a leap that's out of their comfort areas. But that's how but understanding those baselines, you understand then how we're going to move them to that next level. Assessments come into play as well, because as part of that, we are measuring baseline, did they change in the middle, and at the end, were there any changes? You're also getting feedback from folks who are interacting with this human being, whether they know that they're in this coaching journey or not. And they are too giving feedback around the person. So it is being measured, not maybe as scientifically as we'd like, but anecdotally, those changes are being observed, and the person's getting that direct feedback to understand their impact.
In that same frame, and sorry for the accidental pun here, but how much of the problem around change and that resistance that folks have is from a what I would call like a framing problem, that they're viewing change itself in that negative light, in that negative frame, and so you have to break them out of that. How much of people's, let's just put it this way, how much of people's negative association with change is a framing problem, do you think?
Yeah, I'm going to ask you that. When you hear about something's going to change now, you go, oh no, but it's working, right? And so you're thinking to yourself, like, why do I have to change? It's working. And so that's the thing, though. My whole thing is, if you think it's working, why are we here? Why are we here? And get them to really understand what work we're going to be doing, and what is it how they see themselves developing in this process. So it's not me dictating. I cannot prescribe. I have to help them kind of see that as well. So that way it's a joint partnership.
You said something earlier, and I thought it was really interesting. I'm looking back. It was. I'm going to see if this is where you were going with it. It's serving myself. I heard you say that, but also what you said earlier was serving and helping others, and how that balance, because when people, particularly givers, like, I'm just going to make the assumption, like us, givers like us feel a arrogant, narcissistic value or thing boiling out of us when we talk about ourselves. How did you manage that in the, this is what I want to do in order to help others do what they want to do? Maybe I'm going to let you figure out what the heck I'm trying to say.
What I'm hearing is, how do you balance the serving of others versus really feeding yourself? That's what I'm hearing. And for me, it was around boundaries, and I say that really hard because that was very muddled, right? Where you're always saying yes, 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 and you internally are like dying, and you don't even realize it. And so I had to put some boundaries to create some time to allow myself to do that, either through exercise, through meditation, or just sitting in a room for 10 minutes and just doing nothing. But that allowed me to take some time in between to say, how much am I willing to give, but how much am I willing also to reserve for myself? And that's a huge thing that I had to learn.
And how do you manage that? How do you? Because I almost heard in the quantifiable world. Of, well, I need. You said 10 minutes, so I'm just going to grab onto. I need 10% reserved for me. If you were to.
I think, for me, what I do now is that Monday through Fridays are going to be my work days. I now block off time in terms of color coding where I'm spending my time, so I understand how that's being measured. Fridays, don't even contact me. It doesn't happen, right? Because that's where I'm either taking time for the business, where I'm kind of thinking strategically, or just going off hiking for a good 4 hours, and you're not going to reach me anyway. But I've really carved it out to the point where that doesn't happen. Before, oh my gosh, the last two weeks of the year, I couldn't even keep my eyes open. I was exhausted, and I couldn't figure out why. But I was running every single place, not saying no to anything. And I said, this can't happen. So really being intentional around that 4-day work week and making sure my Fridays are mine, and that's how I kind of give myself that fuel.
How do you balance that with the entrepreneurial desire to like chase the shiny object and put in the extra work and all those type of things? Because the boundaries with other folks, saying no, that's a difficult thing for a lot of people as well. Saying no to yourself, like, hey, I got this idea I want to work on, and then getting yourself to not work on it, that's even harder in my opinion, at least.
That's why I have a journal I carry around and just write things in. Or if I'm on the treadmill, I'll just start recording. Look at this, and that way I'll know that, I'm not doing it during these times. Because if I can't have those boundaries for myself, how can I then tell my clients do the same thing? You're not living in integrity, and it's not being real. So I have to do what I allow others to do, and to really model that. So I really take that seriously.
And I think that's an interesting thing there of just like, whether it's the treadmill, walking around, and you have the notebook, voice memos, all those different things of when we talk about boundaries. One thing that people forget a lot is that during the non-work times is usually where you're going to get the best ideas for the work times.
Absolutely.
And but you still want to keep the boundaries like you're talking about. It's not I got to go jump in on this now. It's write it down, hit that first thing on Monday. And I love that because I think that's a key piece to the boundaries conversation that a lot of people miss.
Absolutely. And yeah, you're right. When you have that downtime and your mind's clear, the best ideas come in, and I'm just like, okay, right? And I'm not doing it now, but I'm going to document that, and then make a note to send it off to the team to like look into, from that perspective. But absolutely.
Yeah, I've always referred to that as my back page. So the back page of my notepad, my notebook, right? I flip to that and write down that idea, and then when you have that time to set aside to look at those things, you end up throwing about half of them out because what the hell was I thinking of that in that moment?
It sounds like a great idea at the time.
Yeah. When I was halfway through my workout and my mind was a little fuzzy, that was a really great idea.
Absolutely.
I want to come back to the corporate. So I mentioned that earlier. I wanted to circle back around to that. What's a trend that you're seeing? I grabbed the media phrases that are kind of trending out there, but what's an actual trend that you're seeing amongst businesses?
Oh, there's so many. But you know what? Let me just think about this one, because I think that Right now, I have it that companies are grappling between what's flexible and what's not flexible. And I say that in terms of how folks are working, but also how they are envisioning or not envisioning the future of their operations and business. And right now, folks want flexibility, right? And it may not mean some form of flexibility, whether it's around their health benefits, when it's around work life balance, when it's around those types of things. And if you're not flexible, then people are getting very frustrated. But underneath that, though, we all see the layoffs happening in the Wall Street Journal every day. There's organizations laying off thousands of folks as part of this as well. So there's going to be a kind of a coming, right, in terms of what employees are willing to put up with, but then what our employer is going to also do to meet those demands. And I think that's where that's why flexibility is one thing that I'm seeing people kind of play around with. Well, not so well, but yeah.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Cam Otis Show. If you're enjoying this conversation, then make sure to share it with other lifelong learners in your life so they can enjoy it too. Stay up to date with the show on Facebook and Instagram at Cam Otis Show, and subscribe to our channel on YouTube so you're the first to hear about new episodes and other special content. Now let's get back to the show. I think, and Dad, I want to throw this over to you for your trust triad sales piece. But really, to me, when we talk about like flexibility and especially with hybrid work and all these different things coming off the pandemic, it really goes back to trust for me can you trust your employees that they're doing their job when they say they're doing it, or if they're working less time, are they still getting these things done and all that kind of stuff? I mean, Dad, would you agree? Does it really just go back to trust as the leader?
Oh yeah, trust, and so everybody knows what he's talking about in reference to the trust triad. Trust triad is trust triad for leadership. Trust yourself. Believe what you're making. The decisions you're making are the best decisions you can make in that moment. Believe in yourself. Trust yourself. Trust your team to do the job that you hired them to do. Allow them to do the job. Give them the opportunity to perform. And then when those two are in place, then your team trusts you as their leader to have their best interests in mind going forward. So when you think about it in that sense, yes. And then number two is communication, because you have to be able to communicate that trust. And I'm wondering if, and we'll just throw this up there, which have you seen as biggest strength or weakness, however you want to play the negative or you want to play positive. I'll leave that up to you, Simone, of which one do you see as more important, or that business leaders are screwing up more, their communications plan to their team or their trust that they have in their team?
Well, I'll say this, that it's kind of a both, because you need the trust as a foundational element to allow you to be able to communicate, right? And those who have built that can communicate in an open, honest, transparent way, right? It's when you don't really have that communication plan, strategy, or know what you're doing with your people. Do you really care about them, first of all, to even want to communicate to them, and how frequently? That's where that trust gets eroded, because now people are playing all different type of stories and rumor mills are running, and they don't really know where you really stand on what. And so I think those two are very important and key, right, in terms of driving effectiveness in the workplace right now, and throw in that flexibility piece as well.
Yeah, because if you trust them, then you allow that flexibility. I think back to when people started working from home, and I was one of them years ago, last business I worked for, and that trust between myself and the CEO of whether or not I was getting stuff done,
Right.
and how that can quickly, and I've had this conversation with some of my clients, is how this adversarial, why am I working so hard? Why is this guy who's working from his house in the mountains of Colorado, not getting anything done, sort of thing, or whatever. When you get into that hybrid environment, are you experiencing that animosity going on?
Well, what I'm noticing is that those who are working from home are working twice as hard. and getting burnt out. So you talk about a trend, that is a huge trend in terms of what's happening here. And so it comes back down to allowing the managers to say, give them permission to take a break, right? To know that it's okay to use your PTO. It's okay you take a mental day if you need a day. But that's what I'm really seeing. And especially when you look at women professionals, because they may be caregivers on both ends. You've got the children, and you have your parents that you're grappling with, and then you have your job. And if you have a boss who lacks that EQ, emotional intelligence, right, then it just adds on increased stress to the overall person who's dealing with all these different dynamics and trying to get the work done. In addition, it's not that they don't want to work; they do. Give them that flexibility, give them that understanding, right? So that way they can be, because the more that you give, the more you will get in return.
Like we were talking about earlier in, observing behavior in other people and how, modeling positive behavior and those type of things. I think that's one of the big things that people miss a lot when it comes to like the flexibility, because you can see this a lot in the startup world, especially, is that whatever the leaders do and people tend to do, even take, we haven't talked rugby yet this episode, so I got to throw it out there, but go to a rugby practice, with U of A here. If the captain shows up 20 minutes early, for the first week, he'll be the only one there early. Next week, everyone's there 20 minutes early. He shows up 30 minutes early, everyone will get there 30. It's about setting that standard. If you're a boss who wants people to, with their flexible schedules, to take more care for themselves, take time for themselves, all those kind of things, and you're not taking that time for yourself, then they're going to copy that behavior. Because if the boss is getting there at 7 a.m. and leaving at 8 p.m., well, then that's what's expected. So that's what I need to do. And I think that's such an important piece, that as the leader, you want to just put in all that extra work because you want to keep moving things forward. And that's part of the appeal of entrepreneurship and startups. But then you got to keep in mind that everyone inside your organization is going to model that behavior, and
Absolutely.
That's not healthy in the long run.
No, all eyes are on you, and if you don't realize it, you set the tone for the culture, for everything, communications, transparency or not, and what gets recognized and what gets rewarded. And I think that's really important to note.
Do you see a difference in the size of the business and problem sets they're dealing with? And I'm not talking about the normal size problem sets of like a small business struggling with capital. I'm talking about more the human quotient of it, the leadership, the vision. Is there a difference depending on are you below 10 million in revenue? Are you above 100 million in revenue? Are you a $1 billion company? Have you seen any differences in, leadership problem sets, leadership advantages, those things?
Well, I would say, when you talk about resources, right, for example, because you mentioned the dollars, that kind of helps to do that. But I think that at the end of the day, when you're looking at it in terms of behaviors for leaders, one of the key things I look at is, are you willing to let go? Right? And understand it, if you're beginning or end, that what you did to get to this next level has to change. And that requires you to get the people in the seats, get them upskilled, invest in them, have a clear direction of where they're going, and making sure that they are with you at every step of the way. And regardless if you're a small, large, if you don't have that in place, then that's where everything gets really whack-a-mole and everyone's all over the place. And so really helping them to focus on perspectives. Who's in the room? How are you making decisions? Is this autocratic, democratic way of doing it? Is it a combination? Because sometimes the situation calls for that. But allowing them to understand that if you don't have a clear vision, everybody else is just kind of floating around waiting for you to create that for them.
That's such an important piece. Oh, Cannon, where you going? That delay was getting you just then.
Yeah, the delay got me a bit, but I had something interesting, and we might not be able to answer this, so it might be one of those ones that's a little big and a little hairy for us to actually answer here. But when we start talking about problems in the larger businesses, one of the things that comes to mind for me is, talking with friends and family who work in large organizations, that how much of the problems are just bad leadership in a lot of ways, and like bad communication, those kind of things. And it kind of got me thinking about about this question, which is like, what percent of people actually have that capacity of, whether it's more training or whatever, to really be a good leader? And like, just to throw out like, this is arbitrary numbers here, but like, if 10% of people are good leaders and we need 15% of people to be in leadership roles, then that's, there's a gap there that it's going to be some bad leaders making bad decisions and all those kinds of things.
Absolutely.
I just want to throw that over to you again. It's kind of a tough one to answer there, but of just the bad leader, or the person who's not necessarily capable of taking that next step, and how it can just seep into the rest of the organization.
Well, here's what I'm seeing too, is that we get promoted based upon the work that we've done, our skills. And it means the hard skills, not the soft skills. And I think that's where it lacks, because how do we start measuring those soft skills? Communication, collaboration, being able to make decisions, bring different perspectives in. All of that's a maturity level that also has to be evaluated as you progress. And most 9 out of 10 times, that's the piece that gets missed. And they are thrown into these roles and then are supposed to figure it out. And people don't want to be played guinea pigged with during their professional career. So
You reminded me of a problem set that I wasn't aware of when I was in the Army. I was kind of subconsciously aware of it, but I did some reading and some research, and I'm seeing it in the business world too. This trend that we promote those that look like us. And not necessarily look like us, but I know you do a lot of work in diversity, so this could play into that also. But also those who act and think like us, which is a really interesting thing. And this has actually become a really big problem in the military, because the people who get promoted look back at the people they want to promote and say, well, that guy did a lot of work like I did. I like his style.
Right. Absolutely. What you're talking about, too, is affinity bias or similar to me bias, right? You remind me when I was younger and things of that nature. And yes, it does, because we tend to want to gravitate to folks that look like us, think like us. But guess what? That's how you get groupthink, another type of bias that takes place. And you don't get to get different outcomes because everyone's doing things similarly. And so if you want to do something different, you have to bring in different perspectives. And this is where it becomes important to look around and say, if everyone looks like us, who's missing? Whose other voices do we need, right? And unfortunately, they may not be in the echelons that make the decisions. And so that's an opportunity to look at your succession planning. How are you grooming and promoting and mentoring succession planning for the next group of leaders? And that becomes very important in terms of that diversity. And there are lots of different characteristics. We won't go into all of them today, but a lot that can be taken into consideration as you are looking at your next evolution of business. And I think that's where I talk about too, in terms of what's your vision. As your populations and your market dynamics change, your people are changing, and you have to evolve that.
How much?
And I wish I could. Hold on just one second, Cameron. Just a thought on that, and man, I wish I could remember where I read it or experienced it, but it was one of those. It was just that. It's who are we missing here, and it was go get the lady down the hall who's the junior manager, and bring her in, not to put her at the C level, but to get that perspective. And that's something that, I mean, truthfully, we can all do in that respect of, and I think that is great leadership when you think about that.
Absolutely.
I'm not the smartest one in the room. I need to get the smart ones in here.
Absolutely. And you need to start developing them, upskilling them so they can sit at the table and you don't have to go running around looking for who.
Oh, yeah. Dang it.
Talking about solving for these biases, and the one thing that comes to mind, I want to know if you agree with this, Simone, is that part of the problem, especially in larger organizations, is that we're looking at something that's an internal bias, which we talked about in the beginning, that in order to work on those biases, it's reflection, it's emotional intelligence, it's all those things. So we got this very, for lack of a way to put it, a soft skill. Yeah, this soft skill there to solve this big scary problem. And then we try to systemize it in an organization, which is just it removes all of the softness of the soft skill. I mean, is that it, right? Like, you're taking something that is so personal, and then you're like, okay, well, how are we going to put this into our standard, our operating procedures so that we can move forward and never have this again? Which is just going to create another layer of problems, eventually. So do you think that is the key problem, is that we're making this soft skill and we're taking a soft skill and trying to systemize it?
Well, what we're trying to do is understand. Well, as a business owner, right, you're looking at your organization and understanding where you want to go, or hope you know where you want to go. But you also have to take an assessment of the organization. What are our strengths? What are our weaknesses? What's missing? And that's what you're really looking at, because the World Economic Forum has identified some areas that are going to be needed, right, that are missing. Critical thinking. You think critical thinking is missing? How people can solve complex problems, right? Those are some skills that we need. And if you're not training or even educating at the lower levels, high school, elementary, how to think critically, it's not going to all of a sudden appear that we can do that. Creativity. You can't take like music, arts out of the schools and expect people to be creative by the time they get into the workplace. How does that work, right? So thinking about just what's needed in terms of making your organization innovative, competitive, dynamic, this is what should be keeping people up at night and for your business.
And I think that's something we as business owners, business leaders can do in our giving back to the community, is influencing those sort of education patterns. Absolutely. One of mine that I learned about 10 years ago is the trades, and how, man, that was when I was coaching high school rugby, and I saw these boys who shouldn't be going to college. Whether it wasn't necessarily that they weren't mentally ready. Well, they weren't mentally ready, but wasn't that they weren't smart enough. It was they weren't in the right spot to do it, and it wasn't the right fit for them. But because of what we've taught, our curriculum in schools around America, I don't care where you're at, it's if you ain't going to university of some kind, you're a loser, and that's something. Micro. I'm a fan of Micro. We used to be doppelgangers until I got the mustache. But Micro is a huge proponent of that, of the trades, and man, I've got a couple of business owner friends that that their business is manufacturing, and they can't find the skilled labor. The good old days of metal shop and woodwork and wood shop.
Interesting. But you mentioned rugby, a book that I love and I utilize a lot. It's called Legacy. I don't know if you've read that one. So I love that book. So definitely, as rugby fans, yes. And it's all about leadership, right? And leaving things better than when you actually came in. So I think it's
sweeping the shed. Sweeping the shed, right?
Absolutely, right? Absolutely.
Well, I'll tell you what. For me, what I learned today, I always have something that's pretty serious and profound, because that's me, very serious all the time. But today I've got a new dish that I'm gonna make sure that I ain't cooking, and neither are my clients. It's whack-a-mole. The way you said it, I was like, oh. How about some mole sauce on that? So I just couldn't help but think, whack-a-mole. Yeah. We're not going to cook any whack-a-mole around here. Camden, how about you? What'd you learn?
I caught that too. I was like, that sounds like you ordered Mexican food in a suburban area. It's like, that ain't quite right. But I think one thing, and not necessarily learned, but kind of reinforced. I read this quote, and I couldn't tell you who it is, but something along the lines of, "It's easier to teach a child than it is to fix a broken man," or something along those lines. I'm butchering whoever's quote that was. But when we're talking about the education and a lot of these problems, I think as much as it's important to try to solve the problem that we're facing right now, I also think it's so important that we step back and look at, okay, how do we prevent this from ever being a problem again? And like that phrase I'm butchering is, it's easier to teach the child, it's easier to build those things up than it is to take somebody who's been doing it for 30 years and try to teach them their ways. So that's I think that was a big thing for me today.
How about you, Simone? What'd you learn?
Sure. I think for me, overall, looking at our conversation is around growth. And someone told me like really well that your company grows as fast as you. So if you're not developing, if you're not investing in time, then your company's staying stagnant based upon that. So that's.
Oh, I love that. That's a great one. I'm putting that one in my pocket. Simone, how do folks find you, follow you, learn more about what you got going on?
Absolutely. Check me out on LinkedIn, Simone Sloan. Also, website, yourchoicecoach.com.
Awesome, man. Can't wait. Folks, check her out. Simone, it's been a great pleasure having you here today. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Camden, run us out.
All right. Thank y'all for listening to the Cam Otis Show, and a special thanks to our guest, Simone Sloan, for joining us today. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to pass along to someone else so they can enjoy it too. Make sure to follow the Cam Otis Show on Facebook and Instagram, and you can watch full videos of the show on our YouTube page. And while you're there, make sure you hit that subscribe button too. As always, the full archive of our episodes is available at www.camootisshow.com.